Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Ohio. I'm Jack Hirsch. I'm the president of the Ohio Association of Community Colleges. Before this, my job involved working at Ohio State for 10 years, so I do have a lot of insider tricks. I'm going to hand you one, which is on your walk to the faculty club tonight. At the end of the oval, you'll see the library, tallest building you'll pass. Go in, go on the elevator, go to the top floor. There's a reading room that provides the best views of all of campus. It's a little bit of a hidden gem that not most people know about, but it gives you 360 views. It's the best way to get a quick view of campus and get your bearings. So it is my honor to introduce Dr. Tom Harnisch, a repeat presenter here at MEC and one of my favorites. The title of his presentation is "The Midterms Are Over." I'm sure that made sense. Many printed this out.
Some states.
The midterms are, my last check was House Republicans had 217 this morning, which means it could break in the middle of his presentation. Raise your hand if everybody's phone starts going off and a call is made. Tom, many know, for many years was at ASCU, but is now at SHIO, the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association, and monitors federal policy, and has always done a great job in keeping us up to date on what is going on at the federal level. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Tom Harnisch.
Thank you, Jack, for that introduction, and thank you for MEC for inviting me back for the annual meeting. It's great to be here at the Ohio State University. I think we had a great day yesterday. I got a 2-hour tour of the Ohio Stadium, and as a University of Wisconsin fan, I was just so happy to learn about all of their championships and glory. It was just a wonderful time. My Badgers actually came down here earlier this year, and we had a game, and in the policy community, I will call that a suboptimal outcome for us. But I got to go to bed early that night, really early. So thank you all. Yeah, the midterms are almost over. So that's the presentation title. So we still have a few things outstanding, but so we'll kind of get right into it. My background is I'm at the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association, SHIO. We represent state higher education chiefs in all 50 states, as well as the U.S. territories. Our focus is really on state policy leadership. We have offices, of course, our office in Boulder, Colorado, but we opened an office 6 weeks before the pandemic started. So I was their first BC hire. So that was baptism by fire in higher education policy. So in DC, we're really the voice of the states. So that's our unique voice. Is, of course, there are associations that represent students and faculty, and of course institutions, public and private and the like, and all sorts of constituency groups in higher education. But our focus is really on bringing the state voice to the table in higher education. So a few issues that we're working on right now and just like to talk about. I really welcome a discussion with a format like this. I feel like I'm in a classroom, so I should be asking people questions. So we'll talk about the election results, new committee chairs, of course, the student loan relief plan, appropriation bills that are still out there, regulations, and policy implementation. So, of course, as you all know, we had an election last week. It's still going on in some parts of the country. But we know a few things. First of all is on the Senate, we're going to have either a 50-50 Senate with Democrats having the tie vote, so they will be controlling the Senate. Or if they win in Georgia, there's a Georgia runoff election, it could be 51-49. So Democrats are going to have a slim majority in the Senate. As Jack said earlier, the GOP has 217 votes right now in the House of Representatives. So I think that it's fair to say that they'll have a rather slim majority when all the dust settles in the House of Representatives. So we'll have split control of Congress. And this is where things are going to get interesting. So the Senate Health Committee right now is chaired by Senator Patty Murray of Washington State. She is likely to be chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. So they expect that the next person to be taking over the Senate Education Committee will be Senator Bernie Sanders. He is an independent from Vermont. And on the ranking member, the GOP side of the Health Committee, Senator Burr of North Carolina is the ranking member, so he is retiring. So who's next in line would be Senator Rand Paul, it looks like, or Senator, and he's a Republican of Kentucky, or Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana. So those are the two names that are being thrown around for the Senate Health Committee. So right now, it looks like on the Senate Health Committee, we will have a self-described Democratic Socialist as chair and a Libertarian as ranking member. People have said that there was a story last week that this is the odd couple taking over the Senate Education Committee. So we have the odd couple potentially on the Senate Health Committee, and then on the Education and Workforce Committee, looks like if she gets a waiver, Virginia Fox, who has long been involved with that committee, she's a Republican in North Carolina. She is set to become chair. And it looks like probably Bobby Scott, he's a Democrat of Virginia, would expect to become ranking member. So not a whole lot changing on that committee. That's sort of been the dynamics in recent years. So what are their policy priorities? Yeah.
We have a question over here.
What's HELP stand for?
Oh, Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. So they have a pretty vast portfolio. But certainly healthcare falls into that is kind of the big one, but education is certainly part of that as well. And I would say that higher education in recent years has actually increased its profile on the committee. Traditionally, this committee has been more bipartisan. So Senator Murray has had a history of working with Lamar Alexander in the past. They passed a K-12 bill a few years ago. Where it goes now with the turnover in who's chairman and ranking member, we have yet to see. But traditionally, this is a policy-based committee, and it does have a good history of people working together. That said, on higher education, we have not renewed the Higher Education Act since 2008. I had a full head of hair back then. I mean, it was a totally different time. And we've been working on the Higher Education Act since 2013. So the Higher Education Act traditionally is updated every 5 or 6 years or so. So we've been working on it. That's not to say that we haven't made progress on higher education. It's just that we've put those pieces in different bills. So instead of a comprehensive reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, we'll take the FAFSA simplification, for example. The FAFSA simplification was included in a spending package at the end of 2020. So they take fixes that we need in higher education policy that we can all agree on, and they put them in spending packages. So, or reconciliation packages are another one. So there are different vehicles now, but as far as a comprehensive reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, Terry Hartle, who's the longtime lobbyist for the American Council on Education, said that it could happen this decade, or it could happen next decade. So there's not a whole lot of optimism as far as a comprehensive reauthorization, but we do think that in the years ahead, that at least there'll be some piecemeal changes. So what are the policy positions of some of the folks coming in? Well, they're as different as the sun and the moon. Senator Sanders supports free public higher education. He's been pretty clear about that. He supports a full cancellation of our $1.7 trillion student debt portfolio. Of course, increased student aid for non-tuition expenses, investments in minority serving institutions. So that's just a flavor of his approach to higher education. So he has sees a pretty robust role for the federal government as far as making college affordable for students. Senator Rand Paul, his views on higher education, not a whole lot out there. He wants to abolish the Department of Education. Beyond that, I've seen some bills where on tax deductions and advantages to help people pay for college. So you could take money out of your 401k tax-free to pay for college. So he's what I've seen from him on higher ed is that he's more interested in using the tax code to help people pay for college. So but in large measure, it seems a little undefined as far as his role or his viewpoints on higher education. But clearly he said that he doesn't see the federal government having much of a role and he wants to get rid of the Department of Education. And Senator Cassidy, he's actually been involved. He's a Republican from Louisiana. If he gets to be ranking member, he does have a tradition or a background in working together on various bills. So one bill that he supported, that SHIO has supported, is what's known as the College Transparency Act. So that is that's a bipartisan piece of legislation. That was included last year in one of the bills, but it didn't make it through the process. That would create a federal unit record data system. So this is something that SHIO has supported since 2004. Most of the higher education community is behind creating a student unit record data system, but private colleges have been not supportive of that measure. And then also short-term Pell Grants. So there is interest in having Pell Grants and moving the threshold for Pell Grants from 15 weeks down to 8 weeks. So these are very short-term programs. There's interest on both sides of the aisle for short-term Pell. But the issue is when you get into the details. And Democrats are really concerned about the value of some of these short-term programs. And for-profit providers getting in there and seeing this as a bonanza for them and using students' Pell dollars and not providing them good value. So there was a push last year for short-term Pell Grants that was through a Democratic bill, but that had they put in safeguards for removing for-profit colleges, removing distance education courses, as well as having a minimum threshold as far as how much the value of that program, so the bump in wages that you would get. So, but Republicans have been opposed to measures to keep for-profits out of the short-term Pell. So in the broad sense, I think there's agreement on short-term Pell, but when you get into the particulars, it's less so.
Can you give the definition of short-term Pell?
8 weeks, 8 week programs. Yep.
Certificates.
Very, very short-term programs, but Pell right now, there's a minimum of like 15 weeks or so. So on the House Education and Labor Committee, what you're going to see first out of the gate is you're going to see investigations. And they're going to come. They're going to bring Biden administration folks before the committee. We're likely to see investigations. I think the first one is going to be the student debt forgiveness. There could be also other ones on public service loan forgiveness and how they approach that. So they're going to be asking questions from the first 2 years of the Biden administration, bringing in key figures from the administration. So hearings, I think, will be right. The first thing from the House Education and Labor Committee under Representative Chairman Virginia Foxx. She's also put forth a plan for higher education. So some of the things that she's been interested in, I say workforce Pell and short-term Pell are using that interchangeably. So short-term Pell she's interested in, again, but she wants to include for-profit providers and then risk sharing. So I don't know how if you had conversations about risk sharing. So risk sharing is an idea that I think has gotten some, there's been a lot of interest in recent years about risk sharing, but it's one of those things where when you get into the particulars of it, it starts to break down. So this would basically say that the institution would be on the hook for a percentage of the loans that they give out. So if they have, a certain number of defaults, that they would be on the hook for that. So they would sort of have skin in the game as far as what loans they give out. And I think Democrats have been voiced some interest in that because of some of the for-profit college providers out there, so they want to see them providing better value. I think Republicans have had, especially Lamar Alexander, Virginia Fox, et cetera, have expressed some interest in risk sharing as well. They see it as, protecting the investment, making sure that institutions again have some skin in the game. The challenge, I think, what we'll see with risk sharing is one of access. So when you're giving out loans to some students, particularly students of color, students who don't have wealth, we don't want a situation where institutions don't lend to students just based on their background or their risk portfolio, okay, or their risk profile. So risk sharing is something that you could hear more about in the next 2 years. Income driven repayment. So there's a whole slew of income driven repayment plans out there. And there's interest again on both sides of the committee in taking these and really simplifying this. Because there's just maybe there's 8 or 9. There's a lot there's a whole suite of income based repayment plans out there. And the administration wants to create yet another one. So you could hear more about creating a simplified approach to income-based repayment. As part of that, she would end public service loan forgiveness. I think there's a lot more concern from the GOP these days about public service loan forgiveness and just the general cost of the program. Public service loan forgiveness is an income-based repayment plan for those who are in public service jobs. So basically anyone who's not in the public or private sector. And after 10 years of income-based repayment plans, after 10 years of income-based payments, you can have the rest of your loans forgiven, right? But I think I think the GOP is just looking at it these days as just the general cost involved in that program, and they see the cost starting to escalate. So there's concern about trying to rein that program in and maybe consolidate that as part of their income driven repayment, their approach to income driven repayment. Another one you'll see we're starting to have discussions about is Grad Plus. So this is graduate debt borrowing. And I was in a meeting with Urban Institute the other day. They're really concerned about this Grad Plus. This is about 50% of the loan portfolio on a very small number of students. And these students going on to some of these master's degree programs that they don't see as providing good value to them. Now, certainly people go on to law school, medical school and the like, but there's concern out there that there's been such a growth of graduate programs that people are going on to. And these graduate programs and they're borrowing a fair amount of money for these programs, but they're not getting the value on the back end. So Virginia Fox has expressed interest in just capping the government's exposure on that program. I think it was $25,000 annually. So the Grad Plus program and graduate school debt just generally is something that I think we'll have more and more discussions on. And then, of course, she's opposed to free college plans. Democrats on the House side, I think they want to see a more generous public service loan forgiveness program, and they're also pushing for double Pell. So she was part of the double Pell coalition. I think there's a broad support for doubling the Pell Grant among the higher education community, and the Biden administration is behind doubling the Pell Grant. But that's just an issue again where there's just the cost involved in doubling the size of that program. So differing views from House and House and Senate Democrats and House and Senate Republicans. So student loan debt relief. So this was the page. I edited my PowerPoint earlier today. So this is where we're at on student debt relief. So student debt relief is currently blocked. Over the last few weeks, the administration has collected 26 million applications for their student debt relief plan. They've approved, processed about 16 million of them. So that's a fair chunk of the American population. The student debt relief plan would be if you have income, if your income is below $125,000 or $250,000 if you're married. They would provide you $10,000 in student debt relief. If you were a Pell Grant recipient, you would get up to $20,000 in student debt relief. And the total cost that they've estimated for this program would be about $400 billion. How are they doing this? They're using emergency authority. So emergency authority that they've given, arguing that this is an emergency from the pandemic, so they have the right to forgive student loan debt. Just like they've used it for the student loan repayment pause. Where we're at right now is that we've had a few states that have sued the federal government. So 6 states have sued the federal government. The federal appeals court based in St. Louis has put a temporary hold on this. So the federal government has not accepted any more applications for this. Now, they haven't forgiven any debt. They've just taken in the applications, they've accepted the applications, but they have not moved forward on actually forgiving any student debts quite yet. So we have the Court of Appeals in St. Louis that has put a temporary hold on it. There was an appeals court judge recently that based out of Fort Worth that actually struck it down completely. He said that the administration does not have the authority to do this. That is, the administration is currently appealing that, but the administration is going to be facing a number of conservative judges in that appeals court that's based in New Orleans. So that's where we're at on student debt forgiveness. So everything is pretty much on hold. It could be on hold for the next few months as we kind of work through some of these legal challenges. On the student loan repayment pause. So the student loans, as you know, have been paused first by the Trump administration, starting in March 2020 with the pandemic. People have been allowed not to pay on their student loans without interest or penalties. So that's been going on since early 2020 when the pandemic started. And the administration said that earlier this year that they said we're extending this to December 31st, and that's it. So starting January 1, you're going to have to start repaying your student loans. However, because of the block on student loan forgiveness, I've been reading in recent days that interest groups have been pressuring the administration to extend that out even further. So we will see where that what happens there, but as of right now, the student loan repayment pause is expected to expire on December 31st. Okay, appropriations. So where we're at on funding the federal government, we have a continuing resolution in place. So the federal government's fiscal year starts on October 1. Did we get it done in time this year? No. Did we ever get it done in time? No. So we have passed the continuing resolution that got us through the election and the CR, the continuing resolution, will run out on December 16th. What could happen? We've heard from the chairs of the Appropriations Committee, the Senate Appropriations Committee, that they are close to reaching a deal. Both of those gentlemen on the Senate side are retiring. So they are trying to get a deal done before their term expires, but they said that they're close to reaching a top line number. So that top line, whatever they come up with, that top line number will affect how much funding is for the various programs out there. The House, of course, the House can pass things as long as they have the numbers. The Senate has more negotiations, but House has passed their work. Senate have put out their what's known as chairman's mark. I don't think that these numbers mean a whole lot right now in the sense that they haven't had negotiations with the GOP yet. As far as leverage, I think that they're going to get this done this year. I don't think that they're going to punt it to the next Congress. had the election gone a different way, and maybe the GOP had gained 40 or 50 seats, maybe they would have felt that they would have more leverage or the like. But I think that there'll be a lot of pressure to get things done, and with those key retirements, and when Senator Leahy and Senator Shelby, they say that they're close to a deal, so I think that they will probably get something done in the weeks ahead. Some of the programs just to that we're watching. The Max Pell grant. So the Max Pell is at $68.95. The administration has promised to double Pell by 2029. So they are on a more aggressive trajectory. But the House and Senate have had less aggressive increases in the maximum Pell in their budgets. But again, those budgets have not been negotiated with the GOP yet. Work study is something that we're tracking as well. A number of campuses rely on work study, of course, for just basic operations, right? So especially for regional colleges, those without substantial endowments and like, they really depend on having those federal work study students. Work study is under pressure right now because of rising wages, competition with the private sector. Students, taking a job across town at Walmart instead of working on campus. Certainly they could make more money, they might get more hours that way, but there might not be that flexibility that they would have on campus. They won't be on campus. So we do worry a little bit about college completion rates. Gear Up is another college access program, the TRIO programs. And then one last one I would draw your attention to, and we're advocating really hard for this, is in the FIPC program. So this is the Fund for the Improvement of Post-Secondary Education. We're pushing Congress really hard on a program called Post-Secondary Student Success Grants, so PSSG. And so this would give money to states to invest in evidence-based college completion programs. We started the account last year with it only got like starter money, like $5 million. But the House has put in was $200 million. The Senate had 75 million. But we have practices in higher education that have shown to work. The CUNY ASAP model, so that would be wraparound services for students, doubled community college graduation rates. They've taken that program to Ohio, right? And they had great success there as well. So we see evidence, and we see that at Georgia State has a number of programs that have shown to work and getting students across the finish line. So we want to use the federal government and work with states to try to scale those programs across the country. So we're really pushing Congress to invest in that post-secondary student success grants program. So that's where we're at on appropriations. Those are just a few select programs pertaining to higher ed. And just a graph here of from the Committee for Education Funding on how this in a historical context where we're at. But I do think those blue bars and the final count will come down quite a bit when they start on negotiations. Final regulations. I don't want to get too deep into regulations, just in the interest of time, but the 90-10 rule is that was a loophole. So what the 90-10 rule is it pertains to for-profit colleges. So it's a measure of market viability. So it says if you're a for-profit college, not more than 90% of your funding can come from Title IV financial aid. Okay, so 10% of the funding has to come from outside of Title IV financial aid. And this has been on the books for a long time. The issue that we had with 90-10 is for-profit colleges saw a loophole in this, and that loophole was veterans' education benefits were not included in the calculations. So we saw a number of examples of very predatory practices toward recruiting veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. So the Congress last year closed that loophole, and so this was just regulations to last regulations on the 90-10 rule. So That pertains to for-profit colleges. Prison education programs. How many of you in your states have had discussions on prison education over the last year? Okay. I welcome just thoughts on how you're approaching this. So what I mean by prison education programs right now, in the sense that with Pell, since the 1994 crime bill, Pell Grant or prisoners have not been able to access Pell Grants. Okay. In recent years with the 2020 appropriations bill, that was lifted. Along with simplified fast, but it also lifted that that ban on Pell Grants for the incarcerated. So we estimate that about a 500,000 prisoners would be eligible for Pell Grants. But we also see that states have, rule in these regulations put guardrails on this. So, making sure that there's transfer, making sure that I think transfer was probably the biggest one on there, but there were other ones as well to protect students. Also, having them in programs where if they got out of this and they when they get out of prison, they would not be in programs where they couldn't get jobs because of their record. But be interested to see, how if any of your states are kind of taking a step back and kind of looking at the landscape now, seeing this as a policy window for change. As far as like having faculty in place, having technology in place, having the appropriate facilities. Yeah.
And so we got kind of lucky in Iowa in the sense that the Iowa Central Community College was one of the I think 6 colleges nationally that part of a pilot program. So they kind of had a head start.
Okay. Second
I
chance.
think
Yeah.
For the last 4 years, they've had the second chance. So what they've been able to do is operate almost like a satellite location where there's a prison there in Fort Dodge. They were able to do direct training, but a lot of the other prisons were able to sort of do classes through them. It becomes a complicated issue because you have a medium security prison there in Fort Dodge, so they receive a lot of the training, not able to leave. And so they tried to set it up in a way where you would receive a training welding your stuff in Fort Dodge. So by the time you get to Rockwell City, which is the minimum security prison, you have some businesses in place where you can actually have on-site training. Then one of the issues that they'd run into was, there's not necessarily a connection to the parole board. So a lot of times when you get parole, when you receive parole, then you go back to Council Bluffs, so somewhere where you're from, or that's where your parole officer is going to be. Whereas maybe the connection you had with the employer was in Humboldt or Rockwell City, and they want to maintain that. So then it gets into an issue of housing and deposit and the first month's rent, and employers willing to cover that. And then, how do you maintain that relationship with the parole officer that might be hundreds of miles away? And so one thing we realized very quickly is it's much more than just the training, and then you have to follow that to the next site where maybe the internship type opportunity is, and then connect that with the parole board and then those added expenses to try to it kind of like everything else right now, it kind of came from that need for workforce. And so we were trying to find ways to train them so that when they get through the system, we can connect them with the workers. And so if we don't have that connection because they have to be, paroled to Council Bluffs or Waterloo, it kind of is a disconnect or doesn't really achieve that purpose. But it's ongoing, but we were able to get a head start, to your point, because we've had that second chance Pell, at least at Iowa Central, for the last few years.
Other states that are taking a state approach to this, or reviewing their policies, regulations, or the like.
In Wisconsin, we have been working through our Department of Corrections and looking at, the different models that are out there. I'm with a private nonprofit institution. So Marquette University has their educational preparedness program. And so we're trying to bring all sectors together, working with the Vera Institute of Justice. And trying to, look at models in other states to see how we can collaborate together, and, what institutions can do if they're interested in starting one of these programs. how to do it, in the best way and in a collaborative way, maybe on a regional basis with institutions. So, yeah, we have that going on in Wisconsin, I know. Madison has their Odyssey project as well.
Okay, great.
I have probably one or two more questions.
Okay. So how much time do I have, Susan? About 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
Okay, so why don't we take Jack and then we'll get,
Yeah, I'll be short. I'll just add, we were also a pilot state for Second Chance Pell. We have one community college doing it throughout the state. And so,
Okay.
the opposite of Wisconsin is our prison system basically said, we don't want to deal with 14 institutions in higher education. We're doing one contract with one provider so that we can guarantee the same service throughout the state. So I just think that's an important thing for us to remember, that there's an organization at the other end who's making this decision.
right, and so this new second chance, or the new prison education programs, I would just say that this is going to require increased collaboration because of how the rules are written by the federal government. It's going to require increased collaboration with your Department of Corrections. And in some cases, the Department of Corrections may not have that experience with higher education, depending on your state. So, but it's going to be key. I know NEVI is working on this with their states and their higher education community, bringing them closer to the Department of Corrections. So, prison education programs, and then lastly, changes of institutional ownership, and that's been an issue in recent years as for-profits have transformed into nonprofits. So how do you define nonprofit, et cetera? And then lastly, just on final regulations, there's a number of these here that the administration has gone through negotiated rulemaking, through the negotiated rulemaking process. And then a few other ones that we're watching right now going forward. Title IX. So there have been about 250,000 comments on Title IX that the department has been going through. So we saw Title IX under the Obama administration, then we saw Title IX under the Trump administration. Now we see Title IX under the Biden administration. So the Biden administration felt the pendulum was swinging. The Trump administration felt that it was the deck was stacked against the accused, and the Biden administration is kind of moving it in a different direction. So certainly Title IX and how Title IX claims are adjudicated. This does not include athletics. That's going to be dealt with in a future negotiated, or in a future NPRM. Gainful employment, so that pertains to for-profit colleges. Standards of administrative capability is how we administer Title IV financial aid, and then ability to benefit. So those are folks without high school diplomas and how they can access post-secondary education opportunities. And then policy implementation, so FAFSA simplification. So we're working on a project right now, a grant-funded project on FAFSA simplification and how that affects need-based financial aid programs. So the administration, NFSA, have put out information on that, and more information will be forthcoming. That will be finished by, and they gave me a guarantee, by October of next year. So FAFSA simple, they already said it once, and they said that they will have it done by October of next year. The Chips and Science Act. So we talked last night with Intel, of course, that Chips and Science Act, generous new subsidies for chip providers to bring in and have those chip manufacturing facilities in the United States. The bipartisan infrastructure law, what I would point out for this would be the broadband, the investments in broadband technology. So that's important for states. And then the Inflation Reduction Act, not a whole lot in there for higher education, but certainly for programs that pertaining to the environment and climate change, there's investments in there for that. So, and there are, of course, authorizations in the Chips and Science Act for investments in regional technology hubs, but those are authorizations, and those need to go through the appropriations process. So with that, I'm done. I'm a little over time, but thank you so much, Susan, and I'm around all day if anyone has any questions. Thank you.